Hello, Mr. President. It is November the 12th. It's around 2:30 in the afternoon. It's Sunday here. It's raining again in Vancouver. A couple of things have come to my mind the last day or so. It's been quite a week. It's hard to remember everything that's happened. There were the cuts to my leg and forehead, for which it was very difficult to get medical attention in this country. That was the Illuminati. They'll be here frequently because this is a big one. I was arrested falsely by the Vancouver police and held in jail for several hours for no apparent reason. I was misled with maps that were misdrawn, with figures that were misshapen, and some that were actually shapen in the form of a gun. My Google Live registry to try to find my way around the city was purposefully changed. So there were construction sites that were moved to misidentify landmarks that I had identified previously. Those are the light things. We could get into the starvation. We could get into the theft of property and goods. All my possessions were stolen this week, remember? What else has happened this week? Before we get to the big ones. There was about $40 or $50 that was stolen from the shelter I stayed at last Saturday night, actually, a week ago last night. And that was the morning I woke up. We remember where my shoelaces were tied so that I had to cut them, and I would have no shoes so I could walk on the street barefoot, just like Jesus Christ on his way to the crucifixion. Those are the minor things, Mr. President. We get to the really big thing, and that's where things really have changed this week. This week I would call one of those apex point weeks where things will never be the same. Because not only was I kidnapped this week, remember on Wednesday morning I was kidnapped on Vancouver Island and threatened by the RCMP that if I attempted to get on a boat to get off the island, I would be arrested. So that would be what I would consider kidnapping. I was forcibly held on the island for 24 hours, and if I attempted to get off the island, I would be arrested. So that is now criminal charge territory for several people, and that is undeniable that happened because there are ample witnesses, and I was stalked on the island by the RCMP relentlessly while I was there. It was an escape for my life, frankly. But that brings us to the big picture, Mr. President, that we see this Sunday. I've noted that I've been gang stalked over 6,000 miles across Canada. I've noticed I've covered over 10 degrees latitude. I've covered thousands of degrees in altitude. I've crossed rivers. I've crossed lakes. I've crossed prairies. I've crossed 4 different time zones. I've crossed different languages in different provinces. I've climbed up mountains, I've climbed over hills, I've climbed across rivers, I have climbed through forests, I have pretty much done almost everything that you can do. When you think about it now, Mr. Prime Minister, or Mr. President, I'm sorry, that's how I've started this whole thing. So perhaps this should go to both the Prime Minister and the President. Maybe that's the reason I've been having this writing slip. Let's address this then. This is a pivotal video. Let's address this to both Prime Minister Trudeau and President Bush then, or President Trump. I'm sorry, this is what happens when you don't eat. You start to slowly lose your focus and your memory, and because you're starving to death and focused on where can I get something to eat. Speaking of that, and I won't lose my point, believe me, this is a good one. Speaking of which, yesterday I had 1 cheese sandwich, and today I had a muffin and some peanuts. And I tried to get money off the street, but I just can't get anyone here to help me. Vancouver is really not the most friendly place on the planet. As soon as I can get out of here, I'm getting out and never coming back. I will never come back to this city as long as I live. I hate it here. This is the anti-Whitehorse, that's for sure. Whitehorse, there was death and destruction from the gas champs and clothing facilities all over the place, but the people in Whitehorse had God in them. The people here do not even remotely know what God is, much less where to find him. That's how bad this place is. So I am being starved to death is where that point goes, and that's why I have lapses in memory. It's because I'm being starved to death. But we won't lapse the point that we have traveled across all kinds of terrain and altitude and latitude and time zones, fleeing for my life, and we're still doing it. The interesting thing is, we started off on a tiny island on the east coast, Prince Edward Island, and we ended up on a somewhat bigger island, but still relatively tiny, on the west coast, on Vancouver Island. And so the Canada Secret Police and Stephen Harper and his ilk and the Illuminati have gang-stalked me over 6,000 miles across the country, from Summerside, Prince Edward Island, to Nanaimo, Vancouver Island. And we found that at the end of it, they were so stupid that they attempted to kidnap me. So we now have all kinds of criminal charges on the board, and we can have all kinds of smoke and mirrors and haunted barrel works and pizzas and people speaking Italian and little girls having pedophilia skits and all kinds of nonsense that we can spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars manufacturing. But it doesn't remove the point that there are people in this country that are facing criminal charges and will be in jail for the rest of their lives. I am a Canadian citizen, I am on Canadian soil, and there is a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that protects me from this sort of violence. We will not forget that. Let's not lose that point in all the smoke and mirrors and haunted barrel works that we see all around us. So where we are, Mr. President, is that we have traveled 6,000 miles across the country. We have been relentlessly criminally harassed all the way through, and there's ample evidence and witnesses of that. There's Illuminati right there. Say hello to him, Mr. President. And there is ample evidence of this. At this point in time, the fact that I'm still suffering and that I'm still being gang-stalked is a puzzling question. Why hasn't anyone rescued me? I guess that one needs to be answered at some point in the future, because I'm the one suffering here, no one else. I did go to a lovely mass today at Christ the Church Cathedral in downtown Vancouver. It was horribly violating. It was full of harassment and torture, and I was meant to descend into the depths and commit suicide. They're that desperate that they realize that there is no way out for them at this point, that there are criminal charges knocking at the door. There's Santa's sleigh, I could say, is full of criminal charges for people this year at Christmas time, and the only hope that they have is that they can murder me or get me to fall into such despair that I commit suicide. That is the reason why I'm living on the street, and that is the reason why I'm starving, and that is the reason why I look like I've lost 10,000 pounds, is because I am slowly being murdered. That brings us to one other interesting point. Is I've been saying for a while that Jesus has a plan and that Jesus is in control of the situation. We now see part of the thunder of God revealing itself. We see how shrewd and cunning Jesus is, and how the opposite is of the so-called Illuminati. We see now that Jesus Christ has set a trap, and they fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. He had me travel across the country from one coast to another, and they followed like a bunch of horny little dogs. And they were so horny that they kept committing criminal charges all along the way, leaving paper trails of stolen medicine, of false arrests, of false imprisonments, of perjury, of suborning perjury, of theft of credit cards and bank cards and money. There's a whole paper trail that has been conveniently laid for the authorities to finally prosecute. We see then how smart Jesus Christ is. We see that he led me through this whole country, kept me safe as he promised, and yet laid a trap to ultimately do them in. The interesting thing is that along the way I was thinking this morning, Mr. President, that God wanted me, given that I was traveling west across the country, and this is what God's sense of humor truly is like, and I've mentioned this several times before. God has a very, very large sense of humor. And his sense of humor was, since I got you traveling west, why not come by and see me for a while? So he had me head up to Whitehorse, visit him at a second location on North America, Whitehorse matching New York and the canyons in both, and had me stay to meet him, and he showed me what my future was going to be like in the kingdom of God when I die, and he bid me farewell, and I left Whitehorse. It seems you could look at this situation, Mr. President, and I don't believe you can say that there's any coincidence here. I don't believe that you can deny the existence of Jesus or God through this whole story. I don't believe that you can deny that there's been a gigantic trap set which has been very successful, and which lays, now that we have the criminal charges on Wednesday, that's the thing that I was thinking. That was the primary thing going through my mind today, after I went through the depression that they sent me in, was don't lose focus here. It's been a busy week. There's been a lot that's been thrown at you. You're still alive. You're still standing. But the most important thing is they made a gigantic error on Wednesday morning. They attempted to kidnap me. Oh, they did kidnap me. They attempted to keep me kidnapped and possibly, let's face it, if you're going to kidnap someone and keep them on an island, you're not going to keep them there for 24 hours and then release them. There was a plan to murder me on Vancouver Island. Let's face it. Let's not be trite or childish about this. If adults kidnap a person and keep them on an island, they're keeping them there to murder them. So maybe the FBI and maybe CSIS and maybe some people in law enforcement that are good have figured out what's going on, because definitely there was an attempt to murder me on Wednesday on Vancouver Island. That's where we got some confirmation right there. 2 taps of the umbrella on the ground, just letting you know that the Illuminati heard you and they're watching you, and you are a target of murder. So I ask you again, Mr. President, I would be very grateful to you.
The Vancouver Public Library presents the Dead Poets Reading Series. Revisit the work of great poets delivered by a terrific group of readers. We invite you to join us in the Alice McKay Room at 3 p.m. This is a free event, and everyone is welcome. Thank you.
The Dead Poets Society. Let's go see that. Isn't that appropriately named, Mr. President? So we see here at the end of this that gigantic mistakes have been made, and the question is why I am still put at risk in being held captive. Let's remember, this is the second of many kidnapping attempts. I was drugged with a date rape drug on June 14th, 2016, and brought into this Nazi state where I was planned to be, where plans were for me to be tortured and murdered. I circumvented the first murder attempt at 25 Arthur Street North in October of last year, and it's been a relentless onslaught ever since. So, Mr. President, as I was about to say there, I would be very, very grateful to you and the American people and your government if you could rescue me from this place. I deserve my freedom. I am a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil, and I am being gang-stalked and criminally harassed, which are criminal activities, and there should be charges laid. I demand my freedom, which is guaranteed to me in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And Mr. President, I would also be very grateful to you if you could reunite with me with my sister Kelly Dobson as soon as possible. I miss her. I've been estranged from her because the police removed her from me 3 years ago to, again, cripple and destroy me. We now see this has been a multi-year plan to murder me simply because of the date that I was born, which is a sign of mental insanity. But we'll have to deal with that and the psychiatrists in the future. Immediately, we need to deal with the fact that I was kidnapped on Wednesday morning on Vancouver Island, and the fact that I'm being starved to death and thrown out on the street and struggling to survive. So in the midst of all this darkness, we can pull away now and see the light. That Jesus Christ has a plan, that he led me through the plan, what he wanted me to do for it. And to my credit, Mr. President, every morning I wake up and I'm humble enough to go to God and say, please help me, please guide me, give me strength and courage to get through this day and clarity of sight. And he does. So that's my contribution to this story, is I'm humble enough to listen to God and do what he says. And we see now that the plan has been underway for a while. It was hatched, it was executed, and now it's almost near completion. They fell into it hook, line, and sinker, and Jesus got exactly what he wanted. Thanks for your time, Mr. President. I'll update you again later on. What is my task today? Well, I'm trying to get some food. If you know any people in Vancouver, if they could give me some money to get some food, I'd greatly appreciate it because I'm hungry. I would like to get off here as quickly as possible, and I'd like my freedom back. I would be very, very grateful to you, Mr. President, for anything that you do to get me my freedom back. Very grateful indeed. God bless you and your family. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday, and I'll send you another message again soon.